Welcome to the Glenn Beck program. Tonight, part 3 in our 3-part series on the puppet master, George Soros. Last night, you saw the sheer size of this one man's influence. It is breathtaking. He has brought entire regimes and currencies down to the ground in flames. If you don't understand where America is heading, you will after tonight. And if you think it doesn't matter, well, this is the wrong show for you. I want you to know and remember this. In these last 3 episodes, I'm not making claims. I'm not asking questions. I'm not telling you statements of fact. What I'm telling you is watch George Soros in his own words. Where is the country headed? George Soros.
The question is whether we need, and whether Mr. Soros and his foundations can help to bring more foreign influence into the United States instead of relying on what is essentially a balance between Democrats and conservative Republicans.
I think you put your finger on a very important flaw in the current world order, and that is that only Americans have a vote in Congress, and yet it is the United States that basically determines policy for the world. That is a flaw in the current setup.
It's a problem for him that people in China or France don't get to vote. Find out who sits in Congress. Is it for you? You need to make a choice. Mr. Soros has made his choice. I have made mine. Tonight, you decide. Hello, America, and happy Veterans Day. Veterans and Marcus Luttrell, I'm thinking about you today. Thank you for everything that you have done. Thank you, all of the spouses that struggle and struggle hard for our freedom. For our freedom to be able to say the things that we mean and mean the things that we say. For our freedom to be able to speak against or speak about the most powerful people in the world and not be crushed because you're the little guy. That's what America is about. To have a difference of opinion. And as George Washington said, meet on the battlefield of ideas. Tonight, part 3. Part 3 on George Soros. I'm going to recap, give you a little bit of new information here. I'm going to recap in the next 10 minutes, and then I'm going to ask you for your decision. These are things that you have to ponder. You can't just take my word for it. You have to decide, am I going to look into this more on my own? Am I going to educate myself? Or am I just going to put my head back in the sand and say, no, 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 it's all fine, it's all fine, it's all fine? Because there is a choice. Who is George Soros? And is he involved in the changes in our country? And if he is, and if he's using his money to greatly influence our country, why don't I know about it? And do I agree with him? Maybe you do. George Soros had a rough childhood. He was born in Hungary in 1930. Not the place you wanted to be in 1930, especially if you were a Jew. His mother was wildly anti-Semitic. Again, for anybody who is crying, you know, oh, there's some sort of anti-Semitic attack from George Soros. No, it's not. I'm not calling his mother an anti-Semite. George Soros did. Those are his words, not mine. Quote, my mother was quite anti-Semitic and ashamed of being Jewish. Given the culture in which we lived, being Jewish was a clear-cut stigma, disadvantage, a handicap, and therefore she always had the desire to transcend it, to escape it. That is pretty powerful in a child's life. Both of his parents were non-practicing Jews. His real family name was not Soros, it was Schwartz. But what would you do if you lived in Hungary in the 1930s and 40s? Would you keep the name Schwartz? When George was 6 years old, the family changed the name from Schwartz to Soros. Now, at first, it just makes sense on the surface because you're like, okay, well, of course, they're trying to stay alive. They were madmen rounding Jews up. But when you look at the name Soros, it's an obscure name. What does it mean? Where did it come from? Well, it means to soar. But more importantly, it derives from Esperanto, which is a made-up trans-European language. It was started, I think, in the 1880s, and it was promoted by those who dreamt of a world free of nationalities. Get it? A world free of nationalities, an open society. His father was very much into this. That's how they picked the name Soros. So when George Soros was 14, his father basically bribed a government official to take his son in and let him pretend to be a Christian. His father was just trying to keep him alive. He even had to go around confiscating the property of Jewish people. Now imagine, you are Jewish, and you have to go and confiscate the property of your fellow Jews. And you are pretending to not be a Jew, and if anybody finds out, you're dead. He actually had to endure watching people sent off to their eventual murders. Watching people, gathering their stuff, sending them off, knowing that they were going to go to their death. What does that do to somebody? How do you deal with it? How many years of therapy would somebody need after something like that? This is where George, I think this is important. I think this is where George Soros first learned to pretend to be something other than who he was. He had to. I am not blaming or questioning a 14-year-old or his parents for trying to keep him alive, trying to keep the family alive. I don't think anyone can understand what it must have been like to be Jewish in that scenario. Can you? Especially 14. I don't want to question the 14-year-old. I would, however, like to question the 80-year-old man who has never once said he regretted it, but more than that, he views it as the happiest year of his life. Again, not my words, his words. Listen.
It was actually probably the happiest year of my life, that year of German occupation. For me, it was a very positive experience. It's a strange thing, you know, because you see incredible suffering around you, and in fact, you're in considerable danger yourself. But you're 14 years old, and you don't believe that it can actually touch you. You have a belief in yourself, your belief in your father. It's a very happy-making, exhilarating experience.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody describe the Holocaust years like that. Maybe he's the most healthy man you've ever met. Maybe somehow or another he just got through it. But he also has spoken about how his experience in Hungary has affected his psyche. Listen to this.
Did anybody tell you in Hungary why they didn't like Jews at the time?
Oh yes, and that of course is something, again, very, very much a part of my psyche, anti-Semitism, and you know, a hatred of Jews, which was quite widespread within Hungary.
Even to his own home. I mean, I would love to spend an hour. He's not going to come on in this program and spend an hour with me, and we'd have bigger fish to fry on this, but I would love to understand how it affected his psyche, having his mother basically agree, apparently, I don't mean to judge, with the Germans on hatred of Jews, being anti-Semitic in his own home. How has he navigated that? I'm not going to spend the time. I have invited George Soros to come on this program. He has declined. We have bigger fish to fry. Like, how does he view the world? But it sure would be interesting to explore how this affected his feelings on Israel, which he does not support. He donates so much money to organizations that speak out against Israel. Some stick out more than others. on the donations. But is there any connection there? I'm going to concentrate on the fact that I think the lesson he learned in that horrific year of 1944 was that if you hide your true identity, you can gain power, you can survive. And those who are seen as disadvantaged or handicapped and don't hide their identity, well, they don't survive. The next formative step in Soros's life was college. Now, this is where he attended the London School of Economics. Now, this is the same school that Hayek was from. He wrote Road to Serfdom. This is freedom fighter. But it's also the school where the Fabian socialists hung out. A Fabian socialist university, you remember. The Fabian window we told you about. This is the famous English Fabian Society. We took this picture, actually. Tony Blair was standing right here with it. Fabian socialists, what are they doing? They're heating the world up in the fire that they themselves are stoking. Why are they heating it up? Because they're about to hammer it and remold it nearer to the heart's desire. Fabian socialists are the American progressives. It's the same thing. Heat the world up, cause the problems, so the world heats up so you can remold it. So, which part of the London School of Economics does Soros favor? The Hayek side or the Fabian side? Which one? This is where he learned about an open society. The Open Society Institute, which is now his charitable arm. Sounds harmless on the outside, but, really, who doesn't want to be open? But when you listen to him at the top of the hour in the beginning of the program, we played that. Notice that logo behind him? That was his Open Society Institute. Can your institute bring in more foreign influence here in America? What is an open society, really? Well, you saw it a moment ago. The world has a vote in Congress, but you also saw it in his father, Soros, a world free of nationalities. It is a global replacement for our republic. For all the work our founders did, that's old news. We must progress past it. We must have a new world order. It is a replacement for the republic. He has donated more than $14 million to a group here in America called the American Constitution Society. Well, that sounds great. Except this is a progressive legal group with an area of focus on constitutional interpretation and change. The Constitution can be changed, but you do it not in the shadows. You do it not being invisible. You don't hide who you are. You change it through the amendment process. But he knows you wouldn't go for it. So, he leaves school, leaves Hungary, he survives. He goes to school. He finds open society. And then he becomes wealthy. Now, how did he become wealthy enough to fund his quest to denationalize the world? Hedge funds. He has the estimated 5th largest hedge fund in the world. It's called the Quantum Fund, which, George, sometime we should kibitz about the name. It's worth about $27 billion. Now, here's the interesting and funny thing about hedge funds. We hear all the time about the greedy Wall Street brokers. We hear about greedy speculators, greedy bankers. We hear about greedy executives and their obscene bonuses and their expensive carpets and everything else. But why don't we hear more about those greedy hedge fund managers? Is it a coincidence that everything under the sun when it comes to capitalism is targeted for regulation by Congress, except for hedge funds? You should decide on that one. Now, he's got the wealth. Well, what did he do with the wealth? He decided to collapse regimes and currencies. He did it in England, in Russia, Malaysia, Georgia. Soros lit the fuse to get it done. He's known as, we told you last night, the man who broke the Bank of England. The Prime Minister of Malaysia called Soros unscrupulous profiteer. In Thailand, he was branded an economic war criminal who sucks the blood from people. In 1994, he stated, I just write that the former Soviet empire is now called the Soros Empire. He started getting so much recognition, it fed into his ego. His ego started to grow. He started to get a God complex. Again, not my words, his words. Soros confessed in The New Yorker in 1995 that he had a messianic illusion. a sense of himself being superhuman, quote, since childhood, end quote. He saw in himself the many attributes of the God of the Old Testament. Quote, God in the Old Testament has a number of attributes, you know, like invisible. I was pretty invisible. Benevolent. I was pretty benevolent. All-seeing. I tried to be all-seeing. Benevolent, all-seeing. But the one that sticks out here is invisible. You can see his ego on display when he talks about going after regimes. Listen to it's a game.
When you try to, let's say, improve society, you affect different people and different interests differently, and they are not actually commensurate. So you very often have all kinds of unintended adverse consequences. So I had to experiment, and it was a learning process. The first part was this subversive activity, disrupting repressive regimes. That was a lot of fun, and that's actually what got me hooked on this whole enterprise.
Remember, he believes, and so do many in his regime, that Fox News is a repressive regime. America is a repressive regime. He is turning lives and countries upside down and inside out, and he loves it. He says in his own words he got hooked. He has to feed the addiction. So he decides to go after the biggest market yet, America. Quote, the main obstacle to a new world order is America. You are the main obstacle to what he wants, which is an open society, a replacement for the republic. Well, what does that mean for you? Well, he's talked about it. First, a managed decline of the U.S. dollar. His words, not mine.
So an orderly decline of the dollar is actually desirable.
Does that sound good to you? Does it sound good to you? How much has the price of sugar gone up? How much has your gasoline gone up? Why? Why? Is there a shortage of sugar? No. Your dollar is being devalued. It is going down in an orderly way. Prices go up. Is that what you want? Let me play the clip that we just played one more time at the top of the hour. Listen to this.
The question is whether we need, and whether Mr. Soros and his foundations can help to bring more foreign influence into the United States instead of relying on what is essentially a balance between Democrats and conservative Republicans. I think you put your finger on a very important flaw in the current world order, and that is that only Americans have a vote in Congress, and yet it is the United States that basically determines policy for the world.
Okay.
That is a flaw in the current setup.
Okay, worthless dollar. Global citizens who are voting on who represents us and what we do. That's what George Soros and an open society looks like. When he's done with America, that's what you will have. Now, how does he achieve it? How does he achieve it? Well, we showed you these 5 steps last night. He's collapsing the economies. He is quite good at it, collapsing the economies. We showed you how he's doing it here in America. He's doing it over and over and over again, all of them. He's doing it, in his words, subversively. Subversively. 5 steps to control. You form a shadow government using humanitarian aid as a cover. Subversive activities. Well, he's doing that with OSI. We told you the shadow conventions. The puppet master is putting on a show. We've been an unwitting audience. Now the curtains are being lifted. We're exposing the extent of his reach. We see who he's surrounding himself with. The guy who's running his charitable arm is the founder of SDS, the guy who started SDS, which was responsible for all of the riots in the 60s. He's now the charity guy. You're seeing him build the shadow party. Again, his words, not mine. He funded the shadow party convention. For 3 days, this program has begun to lift the curtains. Well, where's the media? Most Americans will dismiss that he's not a big threat. this is a conspiracy. Or, with the millions of dollars that he spends, Glenn Beck is just lying. The shadow party, the shadow conventions. Like God, he's invisible. In his own words. In his own words, he called it subversive activity. This is his addiction. But it moves from there. Back in a minute. We're talking about George Soros. It is all there. It is all so well financed, so deeply ingrained that no one even notices it. And it is easy to dismiss, but please do not. The mainstream media does not expose it, and I know why. Look at the reach. Look at what you're up against. After my number 2 guy had a meeting with George Soros' number 2 guy about, 4 weeks ago, and they tried to convince me to shut up with a threat, he turns around and drops $1 million off at Media Matters, who coincidentally joins a boycott against me and my advertisers the very same day. What a coincidence. But they're not alone. Media Matters, MoveOn.org, Tides Foundation, Van Jones, boycott, Jim Wallace, a boycott. Who gets, SCIU and AFL-CIO are involved as well. Who gets money from George Soros? Soros, 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 Soros. No connections that we know of here. Is that a coincidence? Look, I know that soon, the gates of hell are going to be opened up. I did this for a reason. Not for ratings, certainly. There's nothing more sexy than, George Soros talk. I did it because I believe it. And I believe you need to know the only way to stop it is the sunlight. We could argue about this for days. I could present hours of evidence. But any thinking, honest American can see smoke and fire. I'm not going to convince those that are asleep or cry ignorance or bury their heads or are just playing left-right, Republican, Democrat politics. Ask yourself this. Could I put on 3 hours of television with nothing but lies and smear, and keep my job against the most powerful man and the most powerful groups in the world? Couldn't be done. How do I know? Because I saw Orson Welles try to do it to William Randolph Hearst. I know Orson Welles. I read about his life. He died alone, broke, and very fat. In the end, you go against that kind of power and you will be destroyed. I get it. I've made my choice. This is Citizen Kane, but mine is not a movie. I wish it were. My 3-hour epic has been just to do this. Please, go and find the truth yourself. Do not take my word for any of it. No tricks, no Hollywood. Him in his own words. It is time to take a stand. What this boils down to is a man with a lifetime of being consistent, of stating his goals and destroying currencies and countries, and then stating his goal that America and her currency is next. Well, we know he wasn't lying the last 4 times. We know he wasn't lying when he said he wanted to be invisible. It boils down to this. Which is a bigger leap of faith? That he is still telling the truth and executing his plan exactly the same way he has done 4 other times? Or this time he's lying about it, and this is the exception. America, you have to decide, because your children, my children's freedom, and the Republic is at stake. We have done so much research for these shows. We have gone through everything for these shows. I mean, reams of paperwork. You don't think the attorneys went through all of this stuff? These shows are posted online at glennbeck.com and theblaze.com. The transcripts, everything is there. The transcript of the CBS interview, where he expresses how he has no regrets of being told to confiscate the property of his own people. Pretend that he wasn't one of them. There's this book. This is a must-read. David Horowitz, Richard Poe, does an amazing job of explaining how the radical left has infiltrated the Democratic Party. When you read this, it will you will understand. Richard Poe also wrote a special piece that is being sent out on my free email newsletter tomorrow at glennbeck.com. It shows an example of how George Soros interfered in Kenya in 2007 in the elections, and how that interference played a role in creating complete chaos there. I want you to also do this. You don't listen to anybody, and you just don't listen to what somebody says about something, and take my word for it, or his word for it. Look for the original documents and the original reports. This is a document from the Committee of Un-American Activities, 1961. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. It features an essay explaining the radicals' top-down, bottom-up theory. This was never supposed to be released. It was. We found it on microfilm in the public library. I'm going to put a copy out of it at theblaze.com or glennbeck.com. You'll see it, but go to your library, see if you can get a microfilm copy of it. And finally, don't read just one point of view. Please, read the arguments. Decide for yourself. You've got George Soros on An Open Society. You have this one from George Soros. You have Alchemy of Finance. You have so many books on George Soros that you can read yourself. Read his point of view. Arm yourself with information. There is no harm in reading what the man has to say, because it exposes him more than anything else. But there are other crucial steps that I'd ask you to take. And I'll outline those next. I often wonder how I will be remembered in history. I think I know, unfortunately, I think I know the answer to that. But if I had my choice, I would like to be remembered for a few things. Question with boldness. Hold to the truth and speak without fear. If you can only learn one thing from this show, I hope it is that. Find out for yourself. There are so many people that are laying a smokescreen down, so you don't know what's going on. You must do your own homework, because only when you do... Do you remember your teacher used to say, show your work, show your work. Why? Because if you could see the work, then she knew you knew it. Why was that important? I don't know for me, because I never had to use math a day in my life. But a lot of people use math all the time. You had to know. Show your work. Do your own homework. This week we have focused on George Soros. Has anyone challenged a single fact with one of their own? I'm playing him in his own words. And what do? They call me all kinds of names. I think the most popular is going to be, if I had to guess, their attack is going to be that I'm an anti-Semite, which does not even make any sense. First of all, no one's a bigger defender of the Jews and Israel than me. Name them on television. I'll walk down, I tell you what, George, you and I will walk down the streets of Israel together. Let's go to Jerusalem, you and me. Let's see which one of us is more popular. Doesn't make sense. George Soros is a Jewish-born atheist who is anti-Israel. So please. Now, when I talk to you about what you need to do in order to be prepared for hard times that I believe are coming, if they're not, make fun of me in 2 years from now. Make fun of me all you want. Please just listen to the possibility. When I say be prepared for the things that are coming as a result of all these progressive Republican and Democratic policies, I'm called a fearmonger. Well, it doesn't address whether or not those things are happening. They can call me whatever they want. I don't care. Here is what is coming. Inflation, higher interest rates, higher energy prices, higher food prices. So prepare. I'll say it again. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That was a nice sounding slogan, but what does that even mean? Nothing. The only thing we have to fear is being unprepared. When you're prepared, you don't fear. But more and more propaganda is coming in the days and weeks ahead because they're intentionally putting us into a pressure cooker. They are intentionally putting us here. And the more things heat up and get out of control, the more the government will be forced to clamp down. If you watch Star Wars, they're already telling you things that are not true. Like deflation is coming, not inflation. Well, that might be true in the housing market, but have you gone to the grocery store? We can see that with our own eyes. Go to the grocery store. Pump the gas. Notice the price. Has it gone up? Why has it gone up? Inflation. They're deflating. They are collapsing the dollar in a controlled way. You can see these things are not true. Now, here's what I believe, that people are waking up in waves. The first wave happened really with a Tea Party, happened about 1.5 years ago. But I sense another wave of people waking up is coming. And we have to be ready to welcome them. There are more unemployed. There will be more people that are struggling as groceries go up much, much more. I showed you the predicted inflation prices on certain items. This is from the, what was it, the American Inflation Institute or something. I don't know if any of this is true. $77 for a can of coffee. Will that happen? I don't know. We called several experts to verify. You think this is true? They said no, they don't think that's true because they just think people won't have any money to be able to afford $77 coffee. So it might stop at $40, but nobody will be able to buy it. I don't know. I just do know that everything in your grocery store and at the gas pump will cost more soon. So what to do? Have faith. Have hope in the truth and charity in your heart. You must be a shelter for others. Just like when George Soros was growing up in Hungary, there were those hostile forces inside of the government and outside of the government. You must be a shelter for others. You can't panic. I've told you before about the Titanic. When the ship hit that iceberg, many of the passengers stayed in their cabins. Well, pretty soon, the water was coming up into their rooms. I don't think this is actual footage of the Titanic, but water started coming into their rooms. Before they knew it, it was up to their ankles. Then it was waist high. That is what's happening to America. And as it goes up floor by floor, as this thing starts to, more people come out onto the deck. More people will begin to wake up. You have to be educated so you can quickly educate them and then help them while they are freaking out. You won't be panicking because you're not a fearmonger. I'm not a fearmonger. We're just the ones being prepared. In the coming weeks, in the coming months, I'm going to give you several action plans because I am not going to spend the time. I'm not going to get any more people into this boat. So it is time for us now to think, okay, how do we, when people wake up, how do we get other people to help us build a bigger life raft? Next year, we're not going to just change ourselves. We're going to change the world. We're going to build life rafts for the rest of the world. I'm going to help you help your neighbors. Big, tremendous, powerful, great things are coming. In the meantime, I want you to think about this pressure cooker that is coming in more ways than one. And I'll explain that next. Oh, I'm giving free gifts to the Jon Stewart God. Inflation is coming. So now, how do you prepare for it? Well, you stock up on food. I know how crazy this is. They're going to paint me for this, but that's okay. Do you even recognize what this is? My grandparents went through the Great Depression. And because of that, they knew what tough times were all about. They never wanted to experience it again. So this is a pressure cooker. They prepared. See, they didn't have the option of going to the stores and getting all the food and everything. It wasn't the same. What they did is they would go out into the fields and then they would can their own food and they'd store it in jars like this. How many of us have done this? How many of us even do this? But it's not necessarily canning your food that you have to. How many of us forgot the lessons that we were taught by our parents and our grandparents? They taught us not to live in debt. My grandparents had a ton of food canned in the basement, and so did my family. My mom used to can all summer long. And my parents, I think they just did it on purpose. They put it in the spookiest part of the basement. All the food would be there. And then my mom would go, oh, go get some corn. I'd be like, no, Mom, don't make me go to the basement. We ran out of something in the kitchen. Mom or my grandma would say, go run downstairs and get it. Send you down to the basement to get a canned bottle of corn. It was the most frightening thing she would ever ask me to do. I mean, I always thought there were bodies and dead zombies working down there, you know what I mean? But that was the grocery store in the old days when we were growing up. I'm probably the last generation that really remembers that, a trip to the basement. I called my Aunt Joanne. Hi, Aunt Joanne and Uncle Dave. I called my Aunt Joanne just the other day. She said, I just finished canning for the season. She's been doing it all summer. She's still doing it. My family, we are not canning, but we are purchasing food. We've done it over the last year. You don't want to go out and run and just put all your money out there. So we did it in little bits and drabs, and we went and we got the food. Now we have a year's supply. If nothing happens, that's cool. I'll tell you, as a dad, there's nothing that has been more stress relieving than me sitting down on the steps, and I never saw this coming. I never thought this would happen. I sat on the steps and I looked at that year's worth of food, that accomplishment. And I know this isn't a surprise, I actually wept out of relief. I thought I could lose my job and my kids are going to be fine. You might not lose your job. Maybe everything I say is coming doesn't happen. That's okay. That's all right. Maybe somebody down the street loses their job. You can be a shelter and a comfort for others, for your family. This is what we have to do. First of all, teach yourself. Read the original sources. Read the truth. Don't just take my word for it. Find out for yourself. If they make fun of you, fine. Prepare to be a shelter and a teacher for others, because they will come. And be who you were born to be. Yes, I can, because I am. I am worthy, I'm competent, I'm smart enough to do it. Do these things. Get yourself out of debt. Have the essentials that you need, lots of them, on your shelf. And in 2 years, if nothing has happened, and then you really want, I mean this sincerely, we can all get together and you can all mock me. It's okay. Right now, why don't you store that mocking up for a rainy day? Let's wait for 2 years. Just wait. If we don't need it, if everything's fine, mock me all you want. Please. Just do your own homework. Listen to your gut. And consider sanity for just a moment. Remember the voice of your grandparents. Last night, my wife Tanya and I were laying in bed, and she says to me, hey, you've just been nominated for Time Magazine's Person of the Year. And I said, go to sleep. I woke up in the morning and I found out that it was true. Sorry, honey. Sarah Palin was also nominated. You got to be kidding me. Sarah Palin actually deserves, think of the impact that this woman has made going around the country rallying people to get behind true conservative candidates. She made a huge, huge difference this year. I noticed that there was one face that was missing, actually millions of faces that were missing. It was the Tea Partiers. The Tea Partiers should actually be this year's winner. I'm not a fan. I hate it when they nominate groups of people and they're like, oh, look, it's the Person of the Year. It's not a person, it's a group. But they are the true winners. I mean, look at the difference that you have made. Here are some of Time's nominees: Barack Obama, Lady Gaga, Steve Jobs, the unemployed worker, David Koch, Charles Koch, and Mark Zuckerberg. Also BP CEO Tony Hayward. Oh, and the communist leader of China, Hu Jintao. So, and then, of course, there's me, because you always have to have a bad guy on the list. You know what I mean? You have to. Maybe they didn't mention the Tea Party because they mentioned Koch brothers. They're nominated. They're supposedly the driving monetary force behind the Tea Party movement. Really? But if that's, why wouldn't you put this guy up? I mean, he's, you know what I'm saying? It again shows how much the mainstream media and the left just doesn't get it. Time magazine said that the unemployed American was the one that made the difference in this election cycle. I'd like to see their evidence on that. I mean, it is the idea that things aren't working, but 4 in 10 of the voters supported the ideas of the Tea Party. 4 in 10. But if they mention that, then it looks like it might be a big movement, and the president's policies had something to do with the outcome, and we can't have that. The mainstream media and the left continue not to get it. Know that you deserve the accolades, but you won't get the accolades. Believe me, I'm not going to win. I'm not writing a acceptance speech on this one. Just know who you are and know that you are the person of the year. More importantly, soon on this program, we're going to start building the people of the decade. You have everybody together because tomorrow we start the quest for Yes, I Can 2012 from New York. Good night, America.